Hey everyone, it's Jessie. Welcome back to Jessie's Hangout. Welcome. Today's episode, as you could pretty much see from the title, it's all about the keepers. It's going to be a two-part episode to a three-part series, all about crime, cold case files, and unsolved files, and also missing persons cases as well. But today's episode is going to be a really touchy, sensitive topic, so if any of you who are listening to today's episode are sensitive or triggered to any of the topics talked about in today's episode, I highly recommend that you listen to it with somebody like your partner or your best friend, or if you truly don't feel comfortable to listening to this episode due to the sensitive topics, I wouldn't blame you if you didn't want to listen to today's episode. That's totally fine. No offense taken by it. If you do wish to go listen to any of my other episodes, you really should go check those out. There's a pretty cool four episodes I have done, so go check those out if you wish. Also, if you are under the age of 18, this episode is not for the younger ears to listen to. So with all those warnings and everything said, let's get into today's topic. A little bit of background of The Keepers, the docu-series. Ryan White is the director of the documentary series, 7-part series, The Keepers. He was approached by his mother, or called by his mother. She had talked to him about the Nuns case, but also about Jean Weiner coming out as Jane Doe. And one of the Facebook posts, she had come out to everybody that she was Jane Doe. And what was talked about from the Jane Doe case in '92, that was her, and how much it touched her. And Ryan became really intrigued with the whole thing. So he went and flew down to Lansdowne, Maryland. I think that's where she's located at. He flew down there to meet her, to talk to her. They talked a little bit before they did film the episodes, before she was on camera. Not only to get a gist of what she was getting into and to sign the documents and everything, but just to kind of really get to know Jean and really respect Jean and, that type of thing. Gemma and Abby had also appeared in The View episode of The View, and they talked about the life after the docu-series was aired and all that kind of stuff and what they hoped the viewers took from it and all that. And also Ryan White did a podcast episode with Jean and the host of You Can't Make This Stuff Up. He did a little talk about life after the 7-part series was aired in May the 19th of 2017. And from what he was saying to the host, he really didn't do a whole lot of research when he went and met Jean. He really didn't do a whole lot of research of what it really means to be a director who does documentaries, and he really wasn't prepared for the outcome after the 7-part series was aired. He really wasn't prepared for the positive, and mostly without a doubt, seriously was not prepared for the negative side of it all. So it was very interesting, to say the least, to hear about that. You guys should really go check out that podcast series. It's a really good series. And also, Jean was talking about how emotional it was for her to relive everything and to talk about everything, and that Ryan also talked about how many times Jean had broken down after just reading the documents that were read to the Archbishop, or not the Archbishop, but the Archdiocese canon lawyers. So imagine having something boxed up for 20 years and trying not to think about it and move forward, and then all of a sudden this docuseries happens and you have to pull out this box that's been dusty for 20 years and relive it all again. And it's really hard for a traumatized victim to relive. So, and it was also very interesting to hear her story. It was very heartwarming and very terrifying, to say the least. It was very emotional for Ryan to do some of the reenactment parts too, so people could kind of get the picture as to what happened to Jean during her junior and senior year and her sophomore years, and the abuse and the traumatizing events and encounters she had with the chaplain and counsel for Archbishop High School. So it was really rough, and a lot of mixed emotions went into it. So with all that said, a little bit of background on that, we're going to go ahead and get into the story itself. Before I get into the story itself, I'm going to go ahead and give you a little bit of background about Sister Catherine Sesnick. She was born 1942 to Joseph and Ann Sesnick. She was the eldest of 3 siblings. It went her, Marilyn, another girl, and a boy. So there was 3 girls that they had. Marilyn and Kathy were really close. They were like 2 peas in a pod. They grew up together. They did everything together, even though their age was different. There was a big age gap, but they were still together. They still did everything. And Kathy really loved Marilyn unconditionally. She really wasn't the type of person that would really easily get mad at somebody. She really wasn't like that towards Marilyn. She was really a bright student. She went to a lot of the private Catholic schools there. She attended to a lot of them. She also went into the nunnery and entered the school Sisters of Notre Dame sometime in the 60s, and then became a school teacher also sometime in the 60s, and entered Archbishop Keogh and was the English drama teacher there. She worked alongside Russell Phillips, who was her roommate at the time. They lived in the carriage house apartments together. They were really close too, but not as close as she was to Marilyn and as she was to her male friend Gary Coop. She wasn't as close to her as she was to them too. She knew that people would be in and out of her life, but she told Marilyn that Gary Coop would be a part of her life a lot. So she was really close. But a lot of the former students talked about how much she impacted and how much she was really respected. And being 25 years old and a nun, she really resonated with a lot of the younger girls there. She was always one of those people that would be willing to sit down and listen to you talk about the things you struggled in life with. She always listened, but she always gave advice as well when needed. So, she was just like a big sister that nobody ever had, so to speak. So she was that kind of person. So she was really well respected and really well known among the teachers, among the students, especially Jean Winter and Gemma and Abby. She really touched them. There was a part in the documentary where, for the first time, one of the parts that was filmed during the 3 years that it took Ryan to film and get everybody interviewed, there was a part in the docu-series where Gemma had talked to Marilyn and told Marilyn that she was the reason, her sister Kathy was the reason she became a teacher herself. So it was a really touching moment. Alright. So that's a little bit of background of Kathy. On November the 3rd, 1969, Sister Catherine says Nick disappeared after going on a shopping trip to get some bake rolls and an engagement gift for her sister Marilyn. Her younger sister Marilyn was engaged to a man named Bob. She was engaged to him. He also went off to Vietnam during the 60s. Marilyn did mention that Kathy really did try to establish some sort of a relationship because he was going to become her brother-in-law, so she wanted to make sure that this man that she was marrying was going to take care of her sister. And she really, really respected and liked Bob a lot. When she went on that trip, she didn't come back from the trip. She went to the Edmonton Shopping Center in Lansdowne, Maryland. There was a little shopping center mall that was kind of like a little village, kind of like how you would find in sometimes there cities. There's like little strip malls and market areas. That's kind of what this was. You could find a bakery, a jewelry person, a grocery store, and that type of thing. So she had went there to go on to that trip. It was around 8 o'clock that night. Abby had mentioned that she had left Archbishop Keogh around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon and then left around 7 or 8 that evening to do her normal routine trip to the Edmonton village to get dinner rolls and a gift for her sister, but that was a different type of thing, but she always got the dinner rolls, so to speak. So when she was expected back that night, Sister Russell became worried because she never came back from that trip. She wasn't home at the expected time. She was expecting Kathy to walk through the door. So this is the part where it kind of baffled police because, Sister Russell had gotten worried that that something wrong happened to her friend. She was worried because she never showed up. But the thing that baffled police and they found really unusual, even Abby and Gemma found it unusual too, and even though Coop was the one that she had called, he found it a little unusual himself. But apparently she had called Gary Coop, which was Kathy's really good friend and she was in a relationship with. Apparently Gary was also out that night with a fellow friend of his, Pete McKinn. He was in somebody he worked with, and they were going out to that night to a movie and to dinner, and then they happened to come back to his office, which was located in a rectory. So they were sitting there drinking this chocolate schnapps, as men would do, shoot the breeze. Basically just shooting the breeze, and they get a call from Russell Phillips asking if he knew where Kathy was. And she was worried because Kathy had never showed up at the time she was expected home. And that worried Gary Coop, so him and Pete McKinn, after hanging up with Russell, got into the same car and drove up to the Carriage House Apartments and sat with Russell, talked with Russell, and got her side of the story and was really trying to figure out what had happened, But here's that part was a little bit weird as well, because when Gary Coop and Father Pete McKinn were questioned by the police after certain events that happened after the not even 30 minutes after the police had left, they found it a little weird because Gary Coop's story wasn't really consistent with Pete McKinn's story. But in the end, it could have been a miscommunication or a misconception or something like that, or a misinterpret. I don't know. It was said that Pete McKinn said that he took a separate car because he was somewhere else at the time that Russell had called, and they took separate cars, and they went and met Russell at the Carriage House Apartments and whatnot. So they found that very strange, and it kind of baffled them a little bit. And it also was really strange because when they interviewed the three of them, one of the detectives noticed that Russell's body language and her statement was a little strange, like she knew more than what she was saying to them. But anyways, they had met Russell there. Like I said, Russell had talked to them, and about 3 hours had passed. They did the math, and was just hoping that Kathy would walk through the door. They were just waiting for her. And they finally decided they just needed to call the police. I mean, she hadn't came in the door. They were starting to all get really worried. So they called the police. They took the statements from all three of them, and then he left. And during that time, Pete McKeon and Father Gary Coop decided they wanted to take a walk, to clear their head. Because everything was just so going on so fast. It was just, when you're going through something at that moment, you just need to take a walk and kind of breathe a little bit. So they took a walk that night, and mind you, in the docuseries they drew a map. There's a road that goes in between the Carriage House Apartments and also this little dead-end type of road, so to speak. And they were coming up on that side where the dead-end street is, and they spot the car. They spot Kathy's car. Well, what was strange about Kathy's car was it was parked illegally. The back of the car was protruding into the road. It was parked weird, but not only was it parked weird and illegally, they got close to the car was muddy, it'd been in a swampy area, and what was even more concerning to the both of them was both of the doors were unlocked and the keys were ignition. And there was a twig hanging out of there. And judging by the photos that they took of the car when they called the police and cordoned off the area, it looked like the car had been ransacked or just really messy in there. It looked like not a typical 26-year-old nun's car. It just looked like it was in a disarray. And the twig was hanging off of the steering wheel. It really concerned the three of them. And Gary Coop and Pete McKeon were taken to the police headquarters and interviewed for a couple days. They were really drilling into Father Coop because they were really trying to establish what relationship he had with Kathy, and the fact that Kathy had turned him down for a marriage proposal the day before she went missing. And they were supposed to meet the day after she had went missing. They were supposed to meet on the 8th of November, and it never happened because she went missing on the 7th. So there was a lot of strange red flags for the police, and that's why they were looking into them. And you could see why they would look into people like that. They want to look into people who are closest to her because everybody needs to be ruled out as a suspect. But even though they ruled out Pete McKeon and Father Coop, they never really let go of Father Coop. They still never really fully exonerated him completely. They still were kind of iffy about him, especially the lead investigator on the case. So the Baltimore Police Department searched for about 2 months for Sister Kathy, and during those 2 months, on the 11th of November 1969, about 5 days, almost a week after the nun had went missing, 20-year-old Lansdowne girl Joyce Malecki was leaving her house and had talked to her mom that day, and her mom showed concern that, hey, the nun is still missing, she's still in the news, the cops haven't found her, be careful, come home. And she had left the house. She went to a fast food restaurant that one of her brothers was working at, and it was called Chino's. Well, back in the 60s, you were always getting a job because, you always wanted to have your own car and all that type of stuff. So one of her brothers was working there, and he'd happened to have his parents' car because he drove his parents' car to work. So Joyce was taking her car and wanted to switch cars out with her brother. So her brother handed her the keys to their parents' car, and she took them and I'm assuming gave her keys to him and got into their parents' car and left her car there for her brother and went shopping and never returned from that trip. And I think it was like a couple of hours or a day after she had went missing, both of the three of the brothers, one or two of the brothers, or all three of them, found Joyce's car in the parking lot, both doors unlocked, and the keys ignition, and no signs of Joyce. It grew very suspicious because of the fact that it was almost a week after the nun had went missing, and now you got this 21-year-old that went missing. And that was very strange to investigators. So they cordoned off the area. They looked into the car. They didn't really go into the car, touch the car, or anything like that. They grew really concerned. And about 3 days after, maybe not even a day after they found the car, and 3 days after Joyce had went missing, a couple of hunters were hunting in a secluded area outside a military base. It was kind of like this old wooded area, and it had a little river and all that type of stuff. And some hunters were hunting with some dogs of theirs, and they came across the body. They immediately called the Baltimore Police Department, or the FBI, so to speak. They cordoned off the area. They really weren't sure at the time whose body or who it was, and and how it got there and all that stuff. So the FBI called the Baltimore Police Department, and they were down there as well. And they called the family, Joyce Malecki's family, because they had found this body. They thought that it may have been Joyce Malecki. They really weren't sure if it was her or if it was somebody else. So they had called them down, but considering Joyce's parents were inconsolable and so upset and devastated by all this, that one of the brothers went down and made the positive identification that it was indeed, in fact, his sister, Joyce Malecki. They did find her body. She was face down in the stream. She had a lot of twigs in her hair. It was a really bad crime scene. I'm not going to go into details. It was just a really bad crime scene. And he went back and told Donald and Daryl and his parents that it was her. It was in fact her. It was very devastating. And what was even more strange about the whole situation is, even though that Baltimore Police Department was looking into it, the Malecki family felt like they weren't really looking into it at all, because in the area that Joyce's body was found in, it was outside a military base, so it was FBI jurisdiction. They had jurisdiction over the body. So they were supposed to hand over the case to the Baltimore Police Department. Well, the Baltimore Police Department told Abby that they never did, because she was trying to file for the documents of Joyce Malecki, because they were going to try and search for her and get some answers for the family, because the family felt abandoned by the law enforcement about this. So it was really strange. And it was a very strange situation. There was a lot of theories that Joyce's death was a cover-up for the nun's murder. So it was really strange. And then during the time that Abby and Gemma were searching for clues and answers and trying to piece together as to what happened to their former teacher, Catherine Sesnick, and digging into what happened to Joyce Malecki, Gemma got a phone call from a former student who wanted to talk to her. It was from the Smith family, Karen Smith. She had claimed that her Uncle Bob had something to do with it, and that her dad had something to do with it, and her mother confirmed that she had the same inkling as she did, that she thought that the two of them had something to do with it, and a guy named Skippy had something to do with it. So she basically told her side of the story of what she think had happened, and how she thought that maybe her uh, uncle had something to do with it, plus the fact that her uncle was a neighbor to Kathy and Russell, and that he didn't live but like maybe upstairs, and it didn't take but like maybe a second to get to where her apartment was. And his apartment was also featured in the newspaper. You can see where his apartment was, and that's pretty creepy. That's pretty creepy to say the least. Um, so she thought that her uncle may have done it. So when they were trying to piece together what had happened, and that they were trying to put in the theory as to what happened, they get another phone call from a woman named uh, Debbie uh, Davis, the Davison family. Edgar Davison was her uncle who was married to her aunt, married to her aunt, to say the least. She was married to her aunt, and she was also the brother to her mother. And she thought that Ed had something to do with it because of his background. He lived a very hard life. He was married to a woman for, I want to say 3 years. He was married to her, Debbie's aunt, for like 3 years. He was a very troubled soul. He did a lot of strange things. His behavior was really strange. Even after the nun's death was really strange too. And she really subscribed how she thought that he had something to do with it, and that his statement that he gave to her, that when he walked in the door on the night that the nun went missing, he had bloody clothes, and that he stated that he got into a fight with his boss and over a paycheck, and it really was suspicious to her, and it really was suspicious to Karen's mother as well, when Ronnie and came in with a bloody shirt, and she really bounded in to tell her what happened, and he said he got into a bar fight. So if that doesn't tell you something, I don't know what does, because that's a weird coincidence for two men to say that. And she also talked a little bit about Billy Schmidt, her brother-in-law, and his weird ways, and the really weird encounter she possibly have had with Billy Smith's boyfriend, Skippy, and how hysterical that made her. It was a very weird situation. It was just a very weird case. It took a lot of turns. It took a lot of twisted turns, especially after years after the case had went cold. It took a lot of strange turns, to say the least. It took a lot of turns. Not so much the fact that two girls are claiming that their uncle had something to do with it. It was just so much that the story was just getting more twister and twister, because it wasn't so much that there was two suspects involved. They already thought that they had another suspect involved, and that they thought that Father Joseph Maskell had something to do with it, even though he wasn't really the one that physically killed her. But he thinks that he may have hired the two of them or the three of them somehow to kill her, because apparently one of the students that Kathy had confronted about the abuse allegations that were made about Joseph Maskell and Archbishop Keogh, one of the girls that remained completely anonymous, but Jean and another student were in the interview, and they didn't remain anonymous. She had showed up to the apartment with her boyfriend that night, and they were talking about the situation, and even the other student that was a student of Archbishop Keogh, she had mentioned her weird encounter that she had with Father Joseph Maskell when she was playing guitar one day at school with Kathy, and he tried to get her to go down to the office, but Kathy told him that she was leaving. It's the end of the school thing and whatnot. But anyways, this classmate and her boyfriend had went to visit the both of the nuns, and she remembers sitting there talking to the both of them, and then all of a sudden, without even knocking or being respectful, Joseph Maskell and Father Neil Magnus came flying into the apartment unannounced and very unrespectful of the nuns' property, and she sent the two of them out. But she Gemma asked what their faces had looked like, and she remembered that Maskell looked really angry and Neil Magnus looked dumb or dull, like he just was kind of It was very strange. And then the day after that encounter, I think it was the day that she had went missing, and it was after that encounter, she got called to Father Joseph Maskell's office and was threatened by him that if she said anything that he would kill her and her family and her boyfriend, and it scared her enough to still to this day not to be able to say anything, or at least remain anonymous. And what was even more weird is after the summer it ended and she was into her senior year, she was asked to go to Father Joseph Maskell's office, and he had asked her if she was the one that went to Kathy and was saying stuff, and she kind of did that line of looking at the floor and kind of spoofed and said, no, that wasn't me. And, he just got really mean and cruel at her and then sent her on her way. It was a really, really traumatic moment for her. It was a really weird case. But anyways, I hope you guys got a lot out of the first episode of this, and I hope that you guys take something from the first part of this. I will continue the second part in episode 6. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, hit that red subscribe button and that notification bell so you'll be notified as to when I upload videos in the future and the other half of this episode. Also, if you haven't already, go check me out on all of my social medias. They're listed in the description box below this channel, along with my main channel. It's Jessie Gamers. Also, don't forget to check out my other 4 episodes that I have already done of Jessie's Hangout. Go check them out. I hope you guys have an awesome day or night wherever you are watching this from, or evening, or morning. And I will catch you guys in episode number 6.